right, welcome. It is great to see you, and thanks for coming, everyone, to this session, which is a preview of something called the Dana Foundation Career Network in Neuroscience and Society. And you've never heard of that because we've just created it. We're in the process of creating it. And the thought tonight is that we'll talk to you a little bit about this new intersection of neuroscience and society, talk in particular about new careers and new career paths that it's opening up, and then tell you a little bit about the work that we're doing to create this career network, which is going to kind of formally launch this summer with email newsletter and website. We'll do a big virtual career fair in the fall. But thanks to Maya Rittman, so thanks Maya and Renee and Alyssa and all of our team, we've been able to do some of these sneak peek events here even before the summer. So that's where we are. We'll go for about 30 minutes of me talking and then open it up for 30 minutes of discussion. I'll flag now that if you want to stay afterwards, we've blocked out the next hour from 6 to 7 Central Time for 2 breakout sessions. I think we've got a big enough group. We may actually have a small enough group. We'll see, but we'll break it out into those 2 groups. Okay, so no funding, no disclosures to make. Acknowledge all these great funders, especially the Dana Foundation, who is supporting this work. So reminder, this is an interactive session. And we may have a small enough group which you can just jump in, but raise your hand when you've got a question or comment and we can handle them, or, I'll take them and handle them all at the end. A lot of time for us to engage with one another. All right, so what are we going to do? First, we'll talk about what is neuroscience and society. Why would we need a career network in neuroscience and society? I want to know a little bit about who you are and why you're here. We'll do your introductions. I'll do my introductions and talk a little bit about the work that I do and our lab does. Just give a little sense. This is not like a whole presentation about these fields, but I'll give you a little sense of that and then we'll do, as I said, talk about this career network and gather your input as well. This is something we're creating. So you can have some input. All right, so what is neuroscience and society? Well, I'm going to assume since you're here that you have some figuring, you know what neuroscience is, and, named after the neuron, the nerve cell, the study of our brains, both human brains and non-human animal brains. But increasingly, the things that are happening in neuroscience have an effect on things in society. And that's really where our work is, and it's what we'll talk about tonight. I'll save all the different slices of society for a few slides later. At the same time, the things that happen in the lab and in hospitals and in other places where neuroscience work is happening are affected by society. They reflect societal values. They can embrace both the highs and the lows, that is, the passions and the biases of society, and we can be aware of that. And so really neuroscience and society is a two-way street. And we'll talk about that tonight. So just a kind of terminology, I'm going to use the phrase neuroscience and society as an umbrella term to cover a whole bunch of different things, some of which, not all of which, are listed here: neuroethics, neurolaw, neuroeconomics, neuromarketing, neurophilosophy, neurocriminology, neuroanthropology, neurosociology, neuropolitics, neuroscience and education, a whole bunch of others like neurotheology isn't even on here. What these fields have in common is, on one hand, the neuro, they're all thinking about the human brain in one way or another. What they also have in common is that they're all relatively new, at least the new versions of them. These fields weren't looking like this even 30 years ago. So this stuff is new. And our website, which again, you'll just see a placeholder now, but will be launched over the summer, is called NeuroX Careers. The idea being that it's the intersection, the X between neuro and these various fields that are generating new careers. Okay, so why did we think it was useful, important? Why might the Dana Foundation have thought it was useful to create a career network in neuroscience and society? So to understand this is really requires some thinking about the future and the way that new technology comes on board. And I'm going to do it by way of analogy to artificial intelligence, AI. Our lab actually also works in AI. I'm not going to talk a lot about, actually hardly at all about AI tonight, except that you may not know this, but right now, of course, you know that AI is like the hottest thing right now, right? Everybody's talking about it. It's in everywhere. You might not have known that it wasn't always the case. In fact, there have been, as this one graphic captures, AI has had a long history of always being the next big thing. So much so that historians talk about two AI winters, AI winter 1 and AI winter 2. And in each of these winters, basically what happened was people were like, oh, AI, invest in AI, it's going to be AI. And then AI like couldn't do anything, right? It sucked pretty much. And I was like, oh, well, that's not going to forget that. Let's go on to something else. And then it happened again, right? Another, and then it didn't quite live up to expectations. And then it took off and it is here to stay. And so these hype cycles happen, and we're kind of in one of those with neuroscience. I'm not going to have time to go into it, but the idea is that eventually, and maybe sometime real soon, neuroscience is going to end up here. Exponential, explosive growth that's going to have major effects and ripple effects all across society. And we ought to be prepared for it. That's the idea. We're not prepared right now in two ways. One, there's just like not an infrastructure. And two, if you look at the folks, the humans who are working in neuroscience and society, I can tell you it's not a very diverse group. It is a group of people from mostly elite schools who are in mostly the same little networks from mostly the same types of backgrounds. And they're really friendly and awesome. And a lot of these people are my dear friends. But clearly our little group right now is not positioned to handle explosive growth. And so our career network has this long-term goal of expanding, diversifying the next generation, that's you on this call, of students, practitioners, scholars, people who do. Our network is specifically designed to do three things. I won't read all the details, share the slides afterwards. Recruit new people, communicate new opportunities. So let's say you get interested, but you're like, I have no idea what to do next. Where do you, well, we're going to try and fill some of that gap. And then eventually through these connections, we can only do a limited amount of this, but facilitate, catalyze new careers. All right, so that's where we're headed. But I told you this is interactive, and indeed it will be. And so I'd love to get a sense of who you are and why you're here. Let's do it two ways. We're right at the cusp of having like too many people to go around the room, but I think we can do it. But I'm also going to launch this poll. It's just two questions. It'll take you less than, I don't know, 30 seconds. What is the main benefit you hope to obtain or you might want to obtain from being part of a career network? It's going to help us as we kind of figure out our priorities. And then just how'd you hear about this event? It's also helping us as we spread the word. Okay, so while we do that, I'm also going to go quickly around the room and ask everyone to just, if you can, you might not be able to, let's do it this way, because I see a lot of folks might not be able to jump in. Anyone who wants to introduce themselves, I hope it's a lot of you, even if you can't put your video on, just raise your Zoom hand. And while you're doing that, I'll ask Maya and Renee to introduce themselves first. So Maya, why don't you go and just say who you are, where you go to school, very briefly, your role, like the 15, 20-second version. And then Renee, you can follow, and then I'll just start calling on everyone who raises hands.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Maya. I'm an incoming M1/Masters of Bioethics and Health Policy student at Loyola University Chicago Stritch School of Medicine. And I'm here today as a research assistant of the Shen Lab, working on this Dana Career Network in Neuroscience and Society. So very excited to be here and excited to see all the participation.
Thanks, Maya. Renee.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Renee, and I'm a recent graduate from the University of Pennsylvania. And at the Career Network, I am the events coordinator, so I'm in charge of doing a lot of outreach and helping to plan events such as tonight's.
Thank you. Yeah, we've got a great group of which Renee and Maya are leading the way. Okay, so I'm just going to read them off in the order that I see them on my screen. So we'll start with Ryan, followed by Juliana, and then Samantha. So Ryan, just unmute and tell us who you are, where you go to school, or if you're out of school, where you went to school, and just why you're here. What do you want to know about?
Hello, my name is Ryan. I'm a junior at the University of Urban-Champaign, and I'm studying brain and cognitive science with an emphasis on computational neuroscience. And I'm just interested to hear more about future career opportunities in neuroscience more broadly.
Okay, cool. Welcome. Thanks for being here. Let's go to Juliana, followed by Samantha, and then Joseph Karuna.
Hi, I'm Juliana Ritchie. I'm a third-year PhD student at University of Michigan in biomedical engineering, specifically working on neural arrays and alternative materials. And I am also getting a certificate in STS studies. So this was a really nice opportunity to see that neuroscience is considering this kind of work. And I wanted to see what it was about and possibly if I could get involved somehow.
Neat. For those who don't know, STS, Science and Technology Studies, and well, we don't have time to give all the background, but neat that you're here, Juliana. Samantha, followed by Joseph, and then Jim.
Hi, everybody. My name's Samantha Chipman, and I go by she, her pronouns. I'm an English and bioethics student at Loyola University, Chicago, and I'm finishing up my MA. In the fall, I'll be entering Emory's English PhD program with the bioethics certificate. So my focus in terms of neuroscience would be that connection with literature. I also have a heavy emphasis on neurodiversity. So I'm interested to hear more about collaborations and conjunctions across those fields. Thank you.
Neat. Welcome.
Thank you.
Neurohumanities. All right. Emory's a great place to do that kind of work. Okay, I think we have three more: Joseph, Jim, and Ritika.
Hi, everybody. My name is Joe. I'm also a third-year undergraduate student at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign in the brain and cognitive science major. I assist in a neuropsychopharmacology lab on campus, and I'm here because I'm interested in learning about different sorts of career paths in neuroscience.
Cool. Welcome. Jim.
Hi, I'm Jim Ellison. I teach positive psychology and the psychology of religion at Triton College. And I'm interested in how my students might participate in research and also what the heck neuromarketing is. I worked at IBM for quite a few years in a marketing organization, and that sounds alternately fascinating and scary.
Yeah. Well, Nita Farahani's got a new book called The Battle for Your Brain. I see it across the way. You should pick it up, and she'd also think it's scary. And Renee, if you can make a note, or Jim, we should follow up with you afterwards. Maybe we can do more with your students too. But thanks for being here. Okay, if I'm not mispronouncing it, I think it's Ritika.
Yeah, you pronounced it perfectly. I'm Ritika. I'm a senior in studying in University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I'm doing an astrophysics and psychology degree. And I was just really interested in the concept of like merging neuroscience with society. I do research in health equity, and I think it's a great way to merge the fields. So I just wanted to learn more and see what the career paths are.
Cool. Well, welcome. Well, welcome to all. And I know some may just be listening in, but you're all welcome at any point to ask your questions, whether it's typing them or unmuting. So you can see already we've got, a really diverse array of people here, and interest and backgrounds. And I think that's really indicative of these fields. They really are multidisciplinary. They're bringing together folks who don't usually hang out together. And some interesting things happen. So we'll get to, I think, a bunch of the sorts of topics that have been raised, and let's jump into it. So that's you. Let me say a little bit about my introduction, what I do, how I got here. So I direct a lab now at Harvard. For the last 10 years, we were at the University of Minnesota, called appropriately, I guess, the Shen Lab. It used to be called the NeuroLaw Lab, but we had to change that. Law, ethics, neuroscience, and AI is our focus. I'll talk more about the work that we do, but I figured since this was a career sort of network moment, I should also talk a little bit about the path, that my own career path, and how I got here. So go to the next slide. And there's a Chicago connection. So that was, I wanted to do something, though. I was born and raised downstream just a little bit, St. Louis, Missouri, gateway to the West. Still, I love my hometown. I went to Harvard College and then finished at the University of Chicago. After I stuck around a year to try and become a professional track and field athlete, was not fast enough. So I went to graduate school. I did a PhD and a JD at Harvard. And that's really where my career trajectory changed. So, if you had asked me to write down 100 or even 1,000 things that I might do, and you had asked me that when I was entering graduate school, I would not have listed law and neuroscience or neuroscience and society. I wouldn't have mentioned neuroscience at all, because traditionally the social sciences, and I was privileged to be in a high-end social science world of law economics and political science and sociology. We didn't have anything to do with the natural sciences. I got very lucky in that one professor kind of sent me over in the direction I was studying trauma and the law's response in the criminal justice system to victims of trauma, to a psychologist named Steven Pinker. That's a picture of him there. And really through his mentoring, and I, huge tip of the cap to him, we just really hit it off. I moved increasingly during grad school in this direction. I went out to UC Santa Barbara and did a postdoc with the MacArthur Foundation Law and Neuroscience Project that took me to Vanderbilt Law School as well. Again, part of the motivation with the Career Network is that the postdoc that I did doesn't exist anymore. It was time limited, it was grant funded. There were only 8 of us who could do it over a sort of 3-year period. I just actually was on a workshop with one of my other fellow postdocs who's now a law professor. It really catalyzed our careers. But there's a gap, it doesn't exist anymore. That took me to Tulane Law School, where I visited for a year. I was at University of Minnesota for 10 years. And then this past year, fully moved to Harvard, where I'm based at the Center for Bioethics at Harvard Medical School, Harvard Law School, and something called the Center for Law, Brain, and Behavior at Mass General Hospital. All right, so that's a little bit of my trajectory. Again, with these moments where I did not plan it, right? It's sort of others helped me in very significant ways. And that's part of the Career Network idea, that it's about this networking that it's hard to anticipate, and you need some friends along the way. The motto of our lab is every story is a brain story. There are 2 really important caveats to that motto. Caveat number 1, at present, many stories, maybe most brain stories, are not fully understood or are poorly understood. And that tension between knowing something about the brain, but not enough, is really problematic or challenging for a lot of applications of neuroscience in society. When do you know enough to rely on the neuroscience to create a new intervention or change public policy? It's an open question. Second caveat is that every story is not just a brain story. It's never been my claim. It never will be. There are also stories of all the disciplines that I just also heard, stories about the humanities. There are stories that involve our history, our culture. There are stories that involve many disciplines. Our thought in our lab is that neuroscience is one of the disciplines that ought to be at the table. So we pursue 2 big questions, and you're going to see 2 arrows that are similar to what I showed before. On one hand, we study the role that advances in neurotechnology and neuroscience and AI have for the law and for policy. And of course, there's a large ethics connection here. So how do you ethically develop and apply these tools? On the flip side, we think about law and governance and regulation as ways to harness in or to let free neuroscience and AI research and applications. And how do you do that to, again, harness the power of these advances while mitigating potential harms? And of course, there are deep ethical questions in terms of what values and principles will inform the regulatory structure you create. What do we actually do all day? So we're a hybrid, some in person, a lot virtual. Neither Renee nor Maya or I live in the same place. And we work together a lot. We do empirical work, theoretical, a lot of community engaged work. I'll talk about that at the end. We're in the community, a lot of education and outreach and policy. So yes, some of our work is, traditional hypothesis testing, and other work looks very different. And almost all the work is collaborative. So collaborated with 150 co-authors, and we've had over 200 folks in the lab. I won't sit here and scroll through all of them. I joke that when some people travel, they pick up souvenirs. When I travel, I bring home new co-authors or research assistants. So watch out, you may become one of the gang. We publish on a lot of things, almost none of which I'll talk about tonight, but everything from developing brains to aging brains. LC stands for ethical, legal, and social implications. And we focus a lot on that too. All right, so if you get interested in this and on the law side, lawneuro.org is where there's lots of law and neuroscience stuff. One of the ideas of one of the centers that I helped to run, our chief innovation officer for the Center for Law, Brain, and Behavior, and it's really true for I think a lot of these fields. We think better decisions aligned with science, including neuroscience, can lead to better outcomes aligned with justice. Now, that's the focus of one group. They might believe better outcomes aligned with profit margins, whatever it is that someone wants to harness neuroscience for. All right, just real quick glance at sort of what's happening in the world of neuroscience and society. And the answer is a lot. Some's good, some's really good, some is bad, and some is really bad. And I don't have time to go through even some of it, but just a tiny smidgen to give you a sense, okay? There's a question about, what is neuromarketing? It's not entirely clear what neuromarketing is, but it is clear that more folks are getting into it. These are recent headlines talking about the way that firms are starting to think about neuromarketing. And in broad strokes, the idea is for all of these neuroscience and fields, they care about the human animal, right? Marketers aren't marketing to cats, dogs, goldfish, trees. They're marketing to humans. And they don't care about the human kneecap or the human femur or the human opposable thumb. They care about the sensory organs that are going to take information to the brain, and that human brain that's going to process that information to facilitate thought, behavior, and action. And in particular, of course, action that might be, to buy this brand of Kleenex or buy that car or shop here or do whatever, right? And given the centrality of that information processing device, the thought is that maybe the things we're learning about this 3-pound organ could help us with our marketing. Well, it's the same in neuropolitics, where again, we're seeing more of these sorts of headlines. On the left, sort of, you might have been following over the last few months or last year, potential riots or riots related to a change in power. Why is that happening? Why do humans via their brains decide to do certain things, vote for certain people, take certain actions, storm a capitol, whatever it might be? Again, the idea is that, yes, there are social structures that lead to those things. There are economic structures, maybe if you're deep in poverty, more likely to do X, but the neural structure, the neural architecture is clearly a part of this picture, a central part of this picture. And so can neuroscience inform our politics? Now, there are also ways that neuroscience might be dangerous. That is, it might facilitate different and problematic interventions into our brains, either reading out information or inserting it. And this raises new questions about how do you, protect freedom of thought. Same thing with neuroeconomics. So many of you may be familiar with economics. I was an economics major in college. And the idea is that you are trying to study the market behavior of humans. And again, we care about in economics the human animal, right? And that human animal is making decisions based on the way that their brains process information. So there are increasing interest in harnessing what we're learning about the brain for improving our understanding and predictions about that human behavior. It's the same thing is happening in the law. Why? And this is a quote from, a little piece that we wrote a long time. It's kind of obvious, but it's worth saying. A lot in law hinges on how brains work. We just haven't called that out because we never knew that it was really all about the brain. But here are just a couple of recent ripped from the headline examples, just from this past month. This is a mass shooter in Pennsylvania. And in his defense, he's going up for trial. He's going to argue that he's a person with schizophrenia, epilepsy, and structural and functional impairments of the brain. And we're seeing more cases like this. That's on the criminal side, but it also happens on the civil side. You may know the actress Gwyneth Paltrow, and she was recently in the headlines for a brain injury civil lawsuit. It was alleged that this alleged victim, she won her case, was hurt by her skiing. And part of the argument, they used a radiologist, using brain images, suggested that the plaintiff head trauma was likely caused by a skier crashing into him, right? So brain stuff is showing up. This isn't neither this nor this headline, nor a whole bunch of other headlines I could give you have anything to do with clinical practice. Well, let me rephrase that. Clinical clinicians may be testifying, but this is not like, how do we reduce brain cancer? This is not how do we treat traumatic brain injury. This is how do you deal with punishment and guilt and justice. This is about how do you recover money. Neuropolitics is how do you, in neuroeconomics, right? How do you explain these political phenomena? How do you get people to buy your car? Those are the questions that concern those fields. That's this neuroscience and society intersection, where the things we're learning about the brain are being used. Now, I do want to give a brief history lesson. You shouldn't think that this is the first time it's ever happened. And I could give you a bunch more headlines like this. This is from 1939, folks, almost 100 years ago now, a little, 90 years ago. Even then, there was an inkling that the brain has something to do with this. And we kind of look at this and think, what were they thinking? They're probably going to look back and think the same today. In fact, some have said that if you look back at the use of neuroscience over the last century, it's been really bad. And we should be really concerned, not excited, but concerned about the use This is a biologically based approach either to criminal justice or to economics or politics, you name it. And here's just one example why some might be concerned with the lines that I'm talking about today. There's often been efforts to try and cure and understand the quote, and I put it in quotes because it doesn't exist like this, the violent brain. There was a criminologist, Adrian Rain at UPenn, who wrote a book in 2013 called The Anatomy of Violence, studied those who murdered and those who don't, did brain scans to try and see, well, what's different? 40 years before that, a group had tried to do it and failed. And 40 years before that, and there's the quote I'm going to give you, Egas Moniz wins a Nobel Prize for this device. If we were live, I just have somebody shout it out on Zoom. I'm just going to tell you, but you can play along with me. Anybody know what this device is? This is for the prefrontal lobotomy. Now, if you hear the word lobotomy, you think, oh, bad. And that's a good reaction. But at the time, that was not the reaction. Here's what the Yale Law Journal, right, like the leading thinkers in law, at least leading students, thought. 1933. They thought, perfection of so relatively simple and inexpensive a rehabilitative technique as the prefrontal lobotomy promises to be a major contribution to the cure of criminals. Right, just let that sit in for a second. Now, thankfully, it never really went down like this. There were actually some examples, including one in Illinois, of a judge ordering a lobotomy for a criminal, for an offender. But it never went widespread, but it could have, right? And it goes to that uncertainty, right? So of course, violence has something intimately to do with the brain. It must. We don't know enough about, again, this so-called violent brain, or even if such a thing exists, and yet we thought we did. One more point, and then I'll move on. In neuroscience and society, it's a two-way dialogue. And the non-scientist, right, the economist, the political scientist, the lawyers like me, we have to work with colleagues in neuroscience. And some of you are going to come to this from the science side, and some of you are going to come from the other side. And we've got to figure out, okay, when can we trust you, neuroscience? And I can't imagine somebody going to Egas Moniz saying, all right, Miss Dr. Moniz, we're not really sure. Like, do you have any kind of like evidence or, that this thing might work? Anyway, Dr. Moniz might say, oh yeah, I have this little thing. It's called a Nobel Prize, right? So even Nobel Prize winning science might not be good enough for societal use. We just got to keep that in mind. Now, I don't say all of this to put a damper on neuroscience and society work. I bet my whole career on this, and so far the bet is paying off, but not everyone, thinks it's going anywhere. At least they didn't. So 12 years ago, we've got a book called a Law and Neuroscience Casebook. And in order to get a book published, you have to write it, but then you have to send it to reviewers. And reviewers, read it and they tell the publisher like, oh, hey, this is going to be a great book, or this is not. And one of our reviewers said this. The topics in your book are so hypothetical and conjectural that most students find the course impractical. Most professors are left wondering what, if anything, neuroscience can ever say that's truly useful to law. It might, they did say, well, it might be worthwhile to invest now in a book that covers a cutting-edge field. And thankfully, the other reviewers agreed. But these fields are moving fast. We published it in 2014, and others are like this. We published a second edition just 6 years later, and 45%, almost half the material is new in just 6 years. And 95% of the material is new from the time I graduated college back in 2000. So these fields are moving quick. There are a lot of indicators. This is just in law, but I could show you in these other fields as well. This is more scholarship, more cases, more legislative bodies like policymakers thinking about neuroscience. Things that used to be philosophical, like, did my neurons make me do it, are now practical. And these sorts of things are happening in criminal cases and beyond. So let me just say a word then about neuroethics as well. So neuroethics is, broadly this many areas in which we have to think carefully about what we're doing. It's really reflexive practice, which is a fancy word for saying, think carefully about what you're doing and why you do it. And are the things that you're doing in neuroscience or in a neuro-related field consistent with the values that you have? And this would include both, as I mentioned before, these sort of ethical, legal, and social implications, but also issues around justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. We ran a big Neurotech Justice Summit. Maybe you can put that link in the chat at Harvard early this year, and there are others doing similar things. So let me talk a little bit then to transition here into all right, how do you kind of do this stuff? And by do this stuff, I mean, not just write a seminar paper on it. You can't pay your rent writing seminar papers on these things. How can you actually make living? So what we're going to be doing, I should say, is that over the next, we're actually probably just a couple months away from our launch, we're going to be putting together a website that will be providing for each of these areas, neuromarketing, neuroethics, neurolaw, like your kind of one-page curated resources for places to go to learn things, for what career paths look like. And we're going to open up to discussion about that. But let me just say a couple words about these things. So neuromarketing is a place where now again, none of these fields are huge yet, right? Go back to that hype cycle I mentioned. We are not into exponential growth. Like you guys, so there's not a single way to go into these. But neuromarketing is hiring. We're going to run, as I said, in the fall, a virtual career fair. We'll have a day on neuromarketing, neuroeconomics. Typically, the backgrounds, you could either come at this from either way, and it's going to be the same in most of these fields. You can have great expertise or experience or want to gain your experience, say, on the marketing side. But then you're going to go out and find collaborators in neuroscience, and that's also broadly defined. They might be psychologists, might be neuroscientists. And you're going to bring them together. Alternatively, you may be someone trained in neuroscience. You're like, I'm going to wield my skills. I want to go find the firm, and I want to be the person who's going to be contributing the science, right? There are two of those sides. The same thing for neuropolitics. You may be majoring in political science, and you want to be campaign manager for the next presidential race, and you may be integrating lessons or collaborating with those who are studying the neuroscience of these things, right? You may be running, for instance, focus groups, where in addition to talking to your focus group participants, you've got them all wearing EEG devices, electroencephalography, measuring the electrical activity as they're giving your feedback on your candidate. You may be the scientist who developed this. You may be the politician who uses this, right? It's this intersection, and you see the theme starting to emerge. These areas are so new. So if I gave this presentation 1 year ago, I could not have shown you this slide because the Journal of Neurophilosophy hadn't launched yet. Right? And it's like, how new is this? It's that new. So you may be a philosopher, and now it's tough to be a professional philosopher. There are a few, academic jobs. But if you are, again, you might be a neuroscientist who dabbles, right? Or you might be someone at the intersection. Or this might just simply influence the sort of work that you do in a related field. And if we had more time, I'd give you slides on neurotheology, neuroeconomics, and the rest. The basic idea with all these fields is that you're going to have to make a decision about how, if you're interested in these things, I hope maybe you will get into kind of where angle you're taking, right? Because you can't be expert in everything. And when you have an interdisciplinary enterprise like this, neuroscience and society, you pick your sort of main area, maybe your second area, and you collaborate. It's just the way all of this is working. All right, so what are we trying to do for anyone who's interested in this? Again, this stuff is going to be rolling out in the summer. So we'll have a regular email newsletter. By signing up to this event, you're already on the newsletter. You'll get word about the new website, which I can tell you, I think Maya and Renee agreed. We just saw the sneak peek of that this week. It's really coming along. We're going to do the first ever virtual career fair for the fall. Our plan is to do 1 week. And we're going to do themed days, like as I said, neuromarketing, neuroeconomics 1 day, neurolaw, neuroethics, neuroscience and humanities, and educational neuroscience, which I haven't even touched on at all yet, though if anybody wants to talk about it, I'm happy to do, which is a bustling, emerging field. Why? For the same reason all those other fields are. Like people are saying, you know what? I'm teaching 3rd grade. Now, in school, you're also teaching, physical development, legs and arms, but primarily you're thinking about mental development, about that brain development. And are there things we're learning about the developing brain that could matter for education? The answer is yes. So in addition, we are trying to do things like this, direct contact to school. So if you kind of are interested in this, you think, I'd love for you just to come talk to me and my friends at Elmhurst, or me and my friends at, IIT, or wherever you are, we're happy to do that. Right? We're setting that kind of stuff up probably for the fall. Again, we're kind of late in the spring. We're setting it up. And then we're also on the flip side doing a lot of partner work. So by the end of the summer, we should have a really nice list of hopeful partners. And I'm asking every partner, like this would be a center, a department, an individual, a neuromarketing firm, to take our pledge, which is really simple. They're going to pledge to read our emails when we send them. That is with, list of cool people who want jobs. And they're going to pledge to send us their opportunities when they have them. Right. And we're just going to facilitate networking. That's all we're trying to do. All right, so one last image before we open it up. So here's some context for career building in neuroscience and society. So the bottom of the pyramid is like, something no one can answer for you exactly, but that through conversation, you can start to discern for yourself, which is like, what do you want to do when you grow up? Now, sometimes people ask this in college, sometimes after college, sometimes mid-career, sometimes after grad school. Also, this question can, vary like day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year. But if it's the case that you think, okay, I'm really interested maybe in some of the things you've been talking about, then you begin to say, all right, so I have a sense of what I want to do. What do I need to get there? Like, what kind of schooling do I need to do? Like, what kind of skill development? You've all had this experience, I imagine, or you will. It's like, well, we don't hire anyone with experience without experience. But how do I get experience, right? How can you actually do that? And really, this power of networking. There's actually like the nuts and bolts of applying, and then eventually you find a job, right? That fits, and that's not easy because it's got to fit your geography and your lifestyle, and enough to pay rent and everything else. So sometimes it looks like this, right? This is I suppose the way that people draw it up, but in practice, it doesn't really work like that, because how are you going to know, right? You've got hard choices to make, right? So I'm just going to give one example, like in the law and neuroscience example, but we could talk about this in any. It's like, well, do you want to be a practicing attorney, a professor, a researcher, a clinician, a policymaker? Like what? There's so many different things you could be, right? Do you want to be a marketer? Do you want to be how do you know? And you're not going to know this question until you try it. This is why that is deceiving to think of all these arrows going up the pyramid, because you don't know if you like it until you try it. And yet you can't try everything. You can't have 5-year career. You can't have 30 different 5-year careers. It's 150 years, even with radical life extension. That's coming, right? That's pushing it. So what are some practical tips? Well, I'd say one thing is that you can dip your toe in the water. You can talk to people. Sometimes just after talking with someone for 30 minutes, you realize that is not for me. Sometimes after talking to somebody 30 minutes, you're like, oh, wow, that's the coolest thing ever. I want to do what she's doing. You can also, use internships. You can use shadowing. You can read. You can watch videos. We can't offer that all in the Career Network, but we're at least going to try and give a little bit of flavor for some of these things, right? So it's this cyclical process where you try a little bit, you reevaluate. Is this what I want? And eventually, somehow, some way, you settle on, wow, okay, this is the thing that's really bringing me a lot of joy, and that I think I can sort of navigate, pay off my student loans. All right, so I'm happy to talk about any more of that. I just want to flag again, we put it in the chat. You'll all get emails about this. You're getting the sneak peek, so we're not quite ready, but we wanted to go ahead and run this event. And I hope you check it out. I hope you tell us after you check it out, like what else you want on it. And, I hope you get involved in these sorts of things. Renee is navigating our email list and a lot of our engagement. You might have Maya's email too. So maybe Renee or Maya, you can stick your email in the chat. All right, so I'll stop.